Let us celebrate today. Let us rejoice today. These doors must open. When they found it easier to ban a book by Toni Morrison.
Some estimates say that nearly 90% of African Americans can trace their lineage back to Charleston.
The waters touching the shores here are the same waters that connect us back to Africa. The same waters which carried our ancestors' hopes and dreams.
This museum that we open today is a gift to our country, and it is a gift to each of us and to future generations.
One of our stories is a resistance story. Black people who were free-thinking and free-moving and 8 times greater in number were the greatest threat to South Carolina in 1740. The wanted posters called them bandits and outlandish Negroes. The woods was full of them. They met up in the wilderness, hid in the hinterlands, deep in the cane and the blackberry, undiscovered but hunted, had children, built settlements, kept watch. Their lives had been stolen, but it was still their life to live.
Anointed people, but yet it was the people who had the strength, always, rise up, ever be free.
To know the price of this privilege is to honor a human story, a people's story, my nation's story, the story of one of the most incredible journeys of all time, the African American story. Welcome to the International African American Museum.
The African Ancestors Memorial Garden was designed by landscape architect Walter Hood and his team. You can think about it as multiple gardens comprising a single experience. It begins the interpretive opportunities to discover not only the grounds, but the African American journey. We think about the garden as the beginning of the museum experience. I usually start any tour I'm conducting at what I've heard Walter Hood refer to as the gauntlet. There's this brick outlay, relatively inconspicuous, that marks the square footage of what we believe was one of several storehouses on Gadsden's Wharf. So I'm going to pause here and share just a little bit of information about Gadsden. Erected and opened in the early to mid 1780s, Gadsden's Wharf was the largest wharf of its kind engaged in the business of the transatlantic slave trade in all of the United States. Until 1808, it would engage in this business, and what we know with certainty, although all of these numbers are estimates, is that tens of thousands of captive Africans would pass the literal grounds on which the International African American Museum stands. This storehouse, a small representation of the difficulty, the trauma, and the tragedy that these captive Africans would experience while on these lands, is also marked with an intersection. 2 contemporary black granite walls which lie between and across that brick outlay. Across the front of that black granite is etched the lines from perhaps Dr. Maya Angelou's most famous and beloved poem, Still I Rise. On the interior of those walls, the granite is polished to a near mirror finish. You see, when Hood began to research and study how he would approach the design of these gardens, what he came to as the crux was that it must be a place where the people can come and sit and remember their ancestors. And while there are a number of places to sit and rest your feet, it is in this space, the interior walls of the gauntlet, that you can literally be in reflection with yourself and in contemplation of the ancestors. As you make your way around, you notice all sorts of intentionally and well-designed flora, all speaking to the triangular trade with the human focus. Grasses with their origins in Brazil Canary Island palms that grow on and off the coast of West Africa, the African Origins Garden, which speaks to the West and West Central African origins of those African captives that would make their way to Charleston and throughout the Western Hemisphere, the sweetgrass fields that lie beyond the Serpentine Wall, that speak to the American South through South Carolina's Low Country. But then there are other gardens, not so much marked by the flora, but by the installations, because not unlike the construction of the building itself, the African Ancestors Memorial Garden is contemporary in its design as much as it is contemplative. So we have the Badge Garden, and I find it just a tad bit ironic that the Badge Garden, the space where you find the highest concentration of seating, spaces to rest, are inspired after the slave badge system. Some believe it to have been the earliest licensing system in the United States, but without question it was one of the earliest, getting its start in the mid-1700s. And it was an opportunity for enslavers to purchase a license that would be attached to their enslaved, those who were considered skilled laborers, essentially meaning that they had to either leave the plantation or live full-time in the city of Charleston in order to conduct their work. And what enslavers would do is hire that labor out, the work out to other individuals in Charleston. What we know is that in many instances, those enslaved Africans were able to hold a small portion of those earnings, and in much, much rare cases, could use them to purchase the freedom of themselves or that of their families. However, most, as they make their way to and through the gardens, are most taken by the tide tribute. It is a fountain that mimics the ebb and flow of tide. At high tide, the reliefs that are inspired and modeled after the Brooks diagrams, which are famous illustrations of a specific ship and how those captive or held captive in that ship would have been placed in the bowels of that slave ship. At high tide, the water completely submerges the reliefs and gives the impression of bodies lying at the bottom of the water, the ocean, and that's intentional because the tide tribute itself is in honor and in memoriam of every man, woman, and child who was lost to the transatlantic slave trade in that harrowing, weeks-long journey across the Atlantic. Having made your way up the grand staircase, or perhaps the elevator if you prefer, visitors are welcomed to the second floor, the interior of the International African American Museum, which I will say we affectionately refer to as IAAM, and you'll hear me refer to the museum in that way going forward. But when you first arrive and you make your way through the doors, you are immediately struck by 8-foot synchronous and asynchronous screens. That is transatlantic experience, and you can think about it as a trailer for what you'll see, for what you'll engage, for what it's our hope you'll discover while at the museum. It's quasi-chronological, beginning with a pre-colonial West and West Central Africa, moving into the transatlantic slave trade, enslavement, which also means the disbursement of millions of African people, primarily, although not exclusively, from West and West Central Africa, as you've probably already heard me mention. And then those people giving birth to the African diaspora as we understand it. Why do I make that distinction? Well, I'm going to chat about that in our live discussion. However, what I want to note is that there is a fantastic short film written and directed by the amazing, fantastically great Julie Dash that you can only experience at the museum. It's titled Seeking, and it explores this incredibly important historic but also contemporary component of Gullah Geechee culture, which often leads folks, when they've completed that brief but moving film, into our Gullah Geechee gallery. To be clear, while this gallery, lovely, full of color, full of life and stories that you hear emanating from screens immediately upon your entry, is a primer, an introduction to a living, breathing, and historically significant community and culture that is really and truly a significant part of the American cultural fabric. There is a replica of Moving Star Hall, which is the only operational praise house in the Low Country located on Johns Island, a bateau boat, which is a flat bottom boat that would have been used as a primary means of transportation and exchange for the Gullah Geechee, who mostly lived on barrier islands along the Gullah Geechee Cultural Heritage Corridor. But again, those voices that are not only speaking to history, but are very much speaking to a living, evolving culture, contemporary works and ways in which the Gullah Geechee continue to offer life, light, and dimension to themselves, and as a result, to the rest of their community. Now, you might be wondering, why am I entering the Gullah Geechee Gallery now? Isn't this a history museum? Isn't there a timeline of some sort? Great question. Well, at IAAM, we are not married to timeline, with the singular exception of one exhibition, which we'll talk about when we reach the West Wing. We are thematically inspired and therefore rooted. So our galleries in the East Wing, as you will continue to discover, are all thematically based. It allows us, from a curatorial perspective, to think through and to play with concepts of people, place, and time at the local, national, and international scale at any moment throughout the experience. Now on to African Roots, African Routes, or Roots, depending on how you pronounce R-O-U-T-E-S. This is one of two exhibition galleries where two exhibitions are in conversation with each other. You'll hear me use the word conversation a few times during the course of this tour. With African Roots, we're really doubling down on the origin points of these African people who are coming directly on these slave ships, who are docking in places like Charleston, but of course in Brazil, in Mexico, in Cuba, in Haiti, in Jamaica, and Panama, in Colombia, and throughout Barbados, of course. And we'll talk a little bit more about that, of course, in connection or relation to Barbados. Then immediately to your right is African Routes. African Routes, as you've probably already imagined, is really speaking to not just the ways, but where these African people and eventually their descendants would find themselves, make their way, and create new ways of thinking about, understanding, and identifying themselves, really transforming and remaking not only culture, not only community, but also the environment around them. That brings us to Atlantic Worlds, our largest gallery. It's an expansion and a deepening in conversation about those routes, how now peoples of African descent are making their way and making lives in these various spaces and places. Again, Barbados, Brazil, the United States via Charleston in the Low Country, but also Europe, the continent of Africa. Because you see, the cross-pollination of African people and African-descended peoples, whether through involuntary or voluntary movement, continues across time. From the moment we're pulled from West and West Central Africa and brought across the oceans, we are returning to those lands. We are making our way from the Caribbean to the United States, from the United States to the Caribbean, from the Caribbean to South America, etc. Peoples of African descent, again, whether they're being moved or moving themselves, are still making decisions to engage, to impact and affect one another, and to shift time in support of each other's cultures, in support of each other's realities, and in support of new realities and change. This is a gallery that uses traditional material culture and archival materials, high-tech screens, and immersive experiences, and gorgeous historical as well as contemporary art to engage that conversation. That takes us to Carolina Gold and Memories of the Enslaved, which is the second and last of those two galleries I mentioned, where two exhibitions are in conversation with one another. Here you have Memories of the Enslaved and Carolina Gold. Memories of the Enslaved is really this personified and personal telling of the enslaved African's story here in the United States. You can hear the voices of the actually formerly enslaved and view the works that they created under those conditions, as well as the ways in which their descendants would choose to remember them. So there's a pot by David Drake, the most famous of the Edgefield potters. And then there's Ashley Sack, which is this gorgeous memoriam of a great-granddaughter to her great-grandmother, whose sack it was as an enslaved girl on the Middleton Plantation right here in Charleston, South Carolina. Then to our left is Carolina Gold, and that is our effort to undertake the peculiar institution of U.S. American slavery via the plantation rice system and economy here in the Low Country. We're not just speaking to the massive nature of the rice plantation system, the incredible wealth that is built from that system, but we're also speaking to the brilliance of those enslaved Africans who were able to not only bring their skills and their capacity to labor, but also the brilliance that was required to transform those skill sets and to utilize the technologies that many of them had been cultivating in their homelands for millennia to a truly full-on commercial scale that at one time at the Low Country at Charleston's height was in competition with the Far East. And this brings us to our final exhibition in the East Wing, South Carolina Connections. Although, because at IAAM, you really are empowered and encouraged to choose your own adventure, to choose your own route of discovery. For some, this last gallery is their first, and that is South Carolina Connections. Once again, we have traditional material culture and didactic content, aka panels and labels, images and archival material, in conversation with 16 individually powered screens that allow you to map, using Google technology, the content that you are reading and engaging with on either side of the hall. It's fascinating to watch young people in particular, and even more so, intergenerational family units explore and map these historically significant spaces in South Carolina that are also noting individual African Americans and African American communities within South Carolina that are making national and international impact. Welcome to the West Wing, which is comprised of one exhibition in two parts, American Journeys, which we're going to talk about in just a moment, our special exhibitions gallery, which of course is where all of our special exhibitions are held, and then our Center for Family History, which is both a gallery but also, and I suspect most exciting for this audience, our Genealogy Center. But let's get back to American Journeys, because there are 530 years of history nestled in two throughways, and we've got a lot to cover in the next few minutes. From 1492 to 2021, American Journeys centers the experiences of U.S. African Americans, framing it within the context of what's happening throughout the African diaspora, and in some instances, the world. Starting in 1492, and this is important to note very quickly, because the arrival of African people and peoples of African descent does not actually begin in 1619, but begins with the arrival of the Spanish, sometimes even as Black conquistadors, moving very, very quickly into the founding of Charleston, we undulate again between the international and the locally grounded and focused, always understanding that Charleston, as local as it may be, as unique as it may be, was always an important national and therefore international port. And at its founding in 1670 was a diasporic space. How? Why, might you ask? Because it was planters, yes, who were English, but who were living in Barbados. Barbadian planters and their enslaved would be the permanent settlers of Charlestown, that of course becomes Charleston about a century later. Why is that unique and why is that important? Because these are individuals who are not bringing the more archetypical American form of plantation systems, but are bringing a Caribbean one, which shifts both the visual but also the cultural aesthetic of Charleston. Moving straight through, we're going to engage the development of plantation systems, the rebellion and revolutions and conspiracies of enslaved Africans who, like all human beings that recognize that they should be treated as such, are seeking freedom. It's sort of interesting how at the late 1700s and into the early 1800s, particularly in the West, the people are standing up and are rising up and are asking, and in some instances they are taking, think French Revolution, Haitian Revolution, their freedom. How those moments of heroism by the everyday man and woman is seen, both in contemporary terms, but also is contextualized historically, shifts depending on who's freedom seeking. However, freedom seeking is always present in the United States, and it becomes ever more important when the country finds itself divided. And we all know that as, you guessed it, the Civil War. Whether contemplated for moral or economic terms, the country is rent apart. We spend a little bit of time there. We know that inevitably the Union triumphs. The country is held together, however tentatively, sensitively, tenderly. But we spend a lot of time engaging Reconstruction. It's a little more than a decade of time, but what we're able to do in that decade of time, or with that decade of time from a curatorial place point, is to dig into how much these newly minted African Americans, post-Civil War, post-13th, 14th, and 15th constitutional amendments and their ratification, are able to do, and how tragic the Compromise of 1877 and the abrupt end of Reconstruction does to undo so much of that progress. Of course, it's met with resistance, but it's also met with movement. Not just movements for social change, but literal movement. The first wave of the Great Migration, which we see coming into fuller view as we make our way around the corner and into the second hall of American journeys. Before we get to that portion, I also want to note how we use time and what's happening and what's occurring within those time frames to guide the way that we're describing and engaging the stories and narratives of the African American journey. So here in the second panel set, and American Journeys 2, you've probably already noticed that there's a pretty high concentration of content about the African American role in the military. Well, why might we do that? You've probably already guessed it. We are engaged in not only one but two world wars between 1900 and 1950. What this also does, though, is open us up to the opportunity to engage a movement, Double V for Victory, which is facilitated and spawned by African American World War II veterans who fight for international freedom only to return home to be treated like second-class citizens. This initiative is an accelerant for the modern civil rights movement that comes into full bloom in the 1950s. There's also quite a lot of space exploring how African American performing and visual arts are informing larger ideas and concepts of Black identity, from the Black arts movement all the way leading to the very end of the exhibition with the Black Lives Matter movement. Artists are engaged, and you can see the ways in which they are both responding and also shifting the cultural discourse. And that brings us to the end of our tour. Next stop, CFH.
Hi, I'm Brian Sheffey, the director of the Center for Family History. My role involves strategic planning around the services and resources the center provides and the overall guest experience within CFH. I'm also responsible for our series of public programming and public engagement activities. I lead an amazing team with deep knowledge of African American genealogical research. The team includes Dr. Shelley Murphy, the coordinator of genealogy education. Shelley has been instrumental in designing and developing our genealogical educational sessions and materials. Shelley also heads up the online genealogy education program for our major donors' employees. CFH research staff include Darius Brown, who leads our United States Colored Troops Pension Applications Digital Archive Project, Grant Michaud, who leads our Black Burial Ground Location and USCT Burial Sites Project, and Whitney Day, who also leads our Public Reference Library. Story Booth is a bespoke recording studio in the Center for Family History. The general public uses easy-to-follow steps to record up to 2-minute clips on one of 4 topics, or topic of their choosing. So what are the 4 questions? What is something unique about your history? Where is your family from? What family member do you want to learn more about? And what have you learned here in the museum today? CFH, in partnership with the museum's faith-based department, has launched the Centenarian Stories Project. This project captures the living history of people who are 90 years old and older. We record a 45-minute interview which becomes part of the center's digital archive. Participants are also provided with a copy of the interview. Story Booth captures the intimate, smaller scale, and poignant personal stories and histories from the museum's visitors, which is something that I absolutely love. Visitors can also email a copy of their story to themselves. And they can also donate the recordings to the center to be included in our digital archive.
My name is Kenneth Walker, and I currently live in the Atlanta, Georgia area. My parents, both sides, are from the Western Tennessee area, with the maternal line from the Whiteville, Bolivar area, and the paternal line from the Moscow area. Both of their parents, my grandparents, were sharecroppers by trade and worked farms. We are just beginning to unlock our ancestry in my family to understand where we have been, both in the U.S. and in the generations prior to that. My encouragement for anyone is to learn your ancestry. There are stories to be told about your past. I am currently the sitting CFO for a multi-billion-dollar company, and I recognize that I am the prayer, hopes, and desires of the generations before me, and that keeps me humble and encouraged to pay it forward. So I would encourage anyone to connect with your past and hear those stories. Bless you.
My daddy, Larry Rufus Waiters, born in Mobile, Alabama. He told me this story about these amazing vanilla wafers that he had when he was a little boy. And his friend gave them to him, and he saved up his money so he could buy them the next time. We went to the store, and he got the vanilla wafers. They were gross. They were nasty. So he just thought, oh, whatever. Asked the friend to buy them for him again, and they were amazing again. And my daddy saved up his money because he wanted these great vanilla wafers, and he went to the store, and he gave the money to the clerk, and he realized he was getting the stale, old vanilla wafers, and his friend, who was white, got the fresh, tasty vanilla wafers. So anytime my daddy wanted those vanilla wafers, he had to get his white friend to get it for him. And he remembered this about 2 months before he passed. And we got to find the closest vanilla wafer, and just the joy on my daddy's face that we bought the vanilla wafers. And they were fresh and they were good.
My name is Walter Winchester. I'm from Monroe, North Carolina. I'm actually the son of the first African American or black man to ever receive a electrical contractor's license in both North and South Carolina. I was privileged to be raised in the home with my mother and father, and also my great-grandfather, Walter Andrew Robinson, who lived to be 121 years old. We researched his birth back to an earthquake in South Carolina. That's how we dated his birth. He told us all kinds of things from slavery, the Civil War, and everything. I have a rich family history. Also in my hometown of Monroe, North Carolina, is where the case known as the kissing case is from, where children were out playing and someone dared a white girl to kiss two little black boys on the cheek. These little black boys were charged with rape, put in prison, refused legal counsel, were not allowed to see their parents or any adults for over a month. This is the kind of things that went on in Monroe, but also, as I stated, my father being the first black licensed electrician out of our hometown, I'm the second black licensed electrician to ever pass the state test after my father did. That's a little bit of history of the Winchester and Robinson family.
Those were just 3 of the amazing family history videos that we've collected since the museum opened its doors in June of 2023. Not everyone records a video file, however. We have thousands upon thousands of audio files which are just as moving and as poignant and as evocative as the videos that you've just seen. Jacobia Adamson, a junior high school age student, left this audio clip. I can't wait to go back to school and share what I learned about African American girls. Derek Martin Jr. had this to say: "It is shocking to see I've never lived in a state that chose the side of people who looked like me." Shishi Seeger's audio clip had an amazing quote: "Coming to a museum like this makes me be intentional about finding my family history." Peter Brown had this: "There is something magnificent and amazing about being in a space where people whose ancestors shared the same struggle as yours, and seeing the uniqueness of every individual who came out of adversity is quite amazing." The Story Gallery is composed of 2 arcs that feature diverse family history connected stories to inspire our visitors to find their own family stories. Background information is provided for each family history in the gallery to reveal the journey behind the research. You will also find excerpts from the people who researched the family stories that are featured in the gallery, family photographs, as well as reproductions of important research documents referenced in each family story, bring these histories to life. At the center, it is our hope that these stories, and countless stories like these, will take a wrecking ball to the notion that African Americans cannot trace their enslaved ancestry prior to the Civil War in 1870. Our interactive kiosks provide information about the Center for Family History and the basics of genealogical research. Our kiosks' content covers subjects like why family history is important, the first steps to take to learn your family history, an outline of the ways you can go deeper into researching your family history, basic DNA information, and how to obtain and search for genealogy-related records. Our kiosks also have information about things like popular genealogy tools, like our very popular Introduction to Family Search video. They also have local community histories that feature African American community-focused stories and histories. I'm going to share one of our centenarian stories that was recently added to the kiosks. These clips are very popular excerpts from a video interview with Mrs. Ursel Chillis, a 109-year-old resident in the greater Charleston area.
Thank you so much, Miss Ursel Moore Chillis, for coming to the International African American Museum here in Charleston, South Carolina, for us to salute you today, because I know you just had your 109th birthday.
Yes.
And we are celebrating that. We are clapping, we're snapping, we're applauding, and we're saluting you, because that is a lovely thing to be 109 and be able to sit across the table to talk with someone about your life and your family. So thank you for joining us today. So we just have a couple of questions for you, and we just want you to express yourself however you desire, okay? So tell us your full name. I know I said it, but you tell us your full name.
M. Chillis.
Okay, Ursel M. Chillis. Okay.
I was born on James Island.
Yes, ma'am.
On a stormy night.
On a stormy night. Tell us more about that stormy night.
My mother told me that she was in bed giving birth to me, and we lived near a creek. And it's right around the corner from where we live today.
Okay.
And they took the mattress off the bed and put it in a wagon and took her because the tide was coming up. And she had to go up on higher ground.
Wow.
The night I was born.
Wow.
And that was September the 14th.
Wow.
1914.
1914, and you were born right there in the house.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. Oh, yes. We had
midwives.
Midwives.
Yes.
We didn't have a doctor. We had midwives at the time.
Yes.
Everybody was born by the midwife.
That's right.
We had one doctor on the island.
Okay.
And he did not come unless there were a problem.
So they wouldn't call him prior to. He would just be notified if there was a problem that happened.
Right. He's one. So I was born. And it took me and the midwife up on higher ground.
Yes. Well, we're so glad that you went above higher ground so that you can be here today. Because I understand it was a hurricane.
It was a hurricane.
Yes, ma'am. Yes, ma'am. Now, wait a minute. Let me go back, because I think I remember hearing the story that your grandfather and your father walked from Alabama all the way to Charleston.
My grandmother.
Your grandmother.
And it was 7 boys of them.
Okay.
It was 7 boys. And they got from all the way from Alabama to Charleston. They were going back to Africa.
Really? That was their plan.
And that was their plan, but they never got there.
Our growing reference library features over 2,000 African American specific books and journals. Our reference books span a wide number of categories. Books that have published county slave deeds and enslavers' probate records. Local history books that include African Americans and/or African American communities. African American history books. Research guides. Famous or large-scale enslavers' papers and records, for example, the papers of Henry Laurens. a limited number of non-United States slavery record books, for example, Barbados records, wills, and administration. You'll also find African American family lineage books, African American family history books, books about African American communities specifically, books about the United States chattel slavery system, and rare and hard to find books, for example, the Alabama Records Collection. Our reference library books are kept within the CFH staff office, which is an area that's actually closed to the public. The library's books can be reserved by members of the public to read in our public reading area, and unfortunately the books cannot leave the Center for Family History. Our books are listed on our Libib service via the link that you'll see on the screen. This link can be found on the CFH section of the museum's website, and you'll see a link for this on the screen. To reserve a book, visitors to the museum will need to create a free account on Libib. Up to 2 books can be reserved by reference library members. Reserving books can be done before a member actually visits the center, and book reservations last for 48 hours. Upon arriving at the center, members notify center volunteers and/or staff that they have arrived. The volunteers or staff will quickly look up the book reservation. The member will provide a photo state ID card to verify their identity, and the ID card will be kept securely in the center's staff office. The volunteer or staff member will retrieve the reserved books and hand them to the member who can read their books in the reference reading area. When finished with their books, members hand them back to the CFH volunteer or staff member on the floor. This person will return the books back to the staff office and collect the member's state photo ID card and return this to the member. The reference library is a recent addition in terms of the center's services for the public, and it's one that I predict is going to become very, very popular, as it's not just for genealogists or family historians. There's books and resource materials that are equally applicable to historians, academics, and students and general researchers. Our public genealogy research area features NetNanny secured iPads with just over 30 links to online record sites hosting millions of records, as well as websites with links to free books. A quick snapshot of what we have includes sites like the library version of Ancestry, the secured version of Family Search Wiki, the ProQuest version of Fold 3, the ProQuest version of African American Heritage, Reclaim the Records, Google Books, Hathi Trust, Internet Archive, and WorldCat. Our online international resources include websites like the British Admiralty Records, which is an excellent resource for researching British slave ships and the transatlantic slave trade. British National Archives, which is an excellent resource for colonial British American colony records. The UK University's Archive Hub, your one-stop shop to accessing some of the most amazing slavery-related records in the British Empire, all in one place. The UK National Archives, which includes the database The American and West Indian Colonies before 1782, and is an excellent resource for wills and estate probates in the American colonies that were believed to have been lost. And there's also the Barbados Records Online. We also offer in-house introduction to genealogy sessions. The 35 to 40-minute sessions are delivered in the CFH conference room, with a 15 to 20-minute Q&A portion afterwards. Our sessions are delivered every Tuesday through Friday at 11 a.m. and 2 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. We produce them to inspire people to begin their genealogy and/or family history journey, along with providing guidance on how to do the research, including research best practices. The session's genealogy research resource section is equally useful to beginner and intermediate level researchers. Topics include, but are not limited to, the basic steps in genealogy research, how to organize your research findings, available resources both online and offline, General genealogy resources, for example, county, vital, immigration, and religious records, as well as covering challenges in tracing African American ancestors. We offer Saturday webinars covering aspects of African American genealogical research as well as African American history. Our webinars are programmed by Dr. Shelley Murphy, and they feature some of the top names in U.S. African American genealogy, as well as historians, researchers, and authors who write about or speak about the forgotten and overlooked chapters of African American history. Webinars also provide tips and guidance on conducting African American genealogical research. Our free, online, Zoom-hosted webinars are typically hosted on the second Saturday of the month. Webinars start promptly at 1 p.m. Eastern Standard Time and finish at around 3 o'clock Eastern Standard Time. Our online Zoom registration is free. You'll find our webinars hosted on the museum's website, the CFH YouTube playlist on the museum's YouTube channel, and the CFH Facebook page for on-demand access. The Center for Family History also offers virtual, in other words online, genealogy consultations. Our online consultation service is delivered entirely online. Consultations are available from Monday to Friday and can be booked at 12 noon, 1 p.m., 2 p.m., or 3 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. Consultancies can be booked by visiting the Center for Family History section of the museum website and look for the subheading Virtual One-on-One Consultations. The Center for Family History team can point to online and brick-and-mortar archives, repositories, and specialist collections that hold invaluable African American records and documents that documented the lives of enslaved people as well as free people of color. The team will also point to digital and physical resources and records people may not be aware of or thought of to help break through a research brick wall. We offer more in-depth guidance on how to build a family tree and the best practices behind building a family tree. And sometimes for the budding or newbie genealogist, using these sessions just for that purpose is an excellent thing to do. Our services provide people with deeper insight into how to research and where to look for records. Sessions last for about 45 minutes with a $79 fee. And if there's any questions about our consultation services, how to book them and how they're delivered and what the experience is like, myself or any of the team will be happy to answer your questions. The best way to contact us is via email, C for Charlie, F for Frank, H for Henry at IAAmuseum.org. That's C for Charlie, F for Frank, H for Henry at IAAmuseum.org. And we look forward to answering your questions. While our consultation service provides people with deeper insights into how to research and where to look for records for a specific ancestor, unfortunately, we are currently unable to provide the following types of research support: on-site, face-to-face, one-on-one consultations. Again, our consultations are strictly online. Nor do we create online family trees, nor do we add information about ancestors to existing family trees, although we're certainly happy to explain to people how to create family trees, to actually help them in that process, as well as giving them guidance and instructions on how to add records to that tree. Nor do we create accounts on popular family tree building websites, for instance, tribal pages, or Family Search, or Ancestry, although we can certainly and we do love to explain how to do this. The Center has acquired hundreds of South Carolina microfilm rolls with old records. While the microfilm is not available to the public, we are busy working to digitize these rolls and add them to the CFH online archives on the museum's website. We offer a full-service records digitization lab. Members of the public can bring in vital records and slavery-related documents for us to scan. Digital copies of the donated records are provided to the members of the public who bring documents into the center to be digitized. Copies of the records are then uploaded to the online CFH archive. Members of the public must make an appointment with the CFH team before bringing any documents in to be scanned. The team can best be reached using the email address C for Charlie, F for Frank, H for Henry at iaamuseum.org. Our document digitization program concentrates on historically significant state and local government records, mostly those that are older and require preservation. While we have started with South Carolina, there are plans to acquire microfilm rolls for the states of Virginia, North Carolina, Maryland, and Georgia to digitize them and make those available to the public. Thank you for the opportunity to share what's happening at the IAAM Center for Family History, our resources, and what's on the horizon in terms of the services that we provide to the public. I hope you enjoy the rest of the sessions for today.